and being able to act on it.
Alright, good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch, broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Thoughtless. Alright, today we're just going to continue layering colors and rhythms. I've got a completely opaque set of colors mixed up today for the next layer before we start adding more translucencies. A very light, bright purple, a medium bluish purple, violet, and an orange, scarlet red, and an ultramarine blue. So here we go.
Survive out there in the wild if they're not in touch with their gut feelings. So we have these two important needs: attachment and authenticity, all to the self, being in touch with ourselves. Now, that's fine. But what if you're 2 years old and your mother doesn't give you another cookie before dinner, so you do what a 2-year-old does when they don't get another cookie? You throw a tantrum. And then you get the message, little kids don't get angry. You might even be punished. Jordan Peterson, the Canadian so-called psychologist, says that an angry child should be made to sit by themselves. So the message that the angry child gets is not that good little kids don't get angry, but that angry little kids don't get loved. No, what I told you was that the attachment drive is not negotiable. If I get the message that my healthy anger, which is just expressing how I'm feeling, is unacceptable and threatens my attachment relationship because I'm going to lose the parent if I do it, what do you suppose I'll do? What do you think is going to get sacrificed? The attachment? Impossible. In every case, the authenticity is going to be sacrificed, and now we become separated from ourselves. And so when you raised your hand in answer to this last question about gut feelings, what you're really telling me is that sometime in your childhood you learned that it was safer for you to ignore your gut feelings than to pay attention to them. And I'm not saying that your parents meant to teach that to you. I don't doubt for a moment that they did their best. But that was their best because of the way this society raises children and stresses parents. The result is a lot of people who are completely disconnected from themselves and who are not in touch with their feelings. Now, I'm going to play another song that illustrates that. It's the saddest song I actually know. And you've probably heard it before, but maybe think about it from this perspective. It's meant to be a love song, but it's actually anything but a love song. Okay, well, I can't make it work, and I'm not going to suffer at it, so it's the song Any Way You Want Me by Elvis Presley. And he sings, you know, I'll be strong as a mountain or weak as a baby. Any way you want me, that's how I'll be. In my hands, or in your hands, my heart is clay, to do with it as you will. You know, any way you want me, that's how I'll be. That's the lyrics. This is thought to be a love song, but it actually is the absence of love song. And if I wish I could play for you, because his voice is so sad when he sings it. But in any case, the point is that the personality that we develop is not actually a reflection of our true selves. Very often it's their defenses against the loss of love. And so it's not us. An illness comes along when we're not being ourselves. When you don't get the attention that you needed as a child, as an infant, you'll be consumed by attracting attention. And now you're going to be very attractive. How many times have you passed a mirror without wondering if you're attractive enough? You're just looking for love. If you didn't get the approval that you needed as a child just for existing, just for being who you were, you would want to be winning approval all the time. winning personality. If you weren't valued, you want to measure up. If you weren't made to feel special just because for who you were, you might be demanding, in which case you'll run for the leadership of the Conservative Party. If you weren't esteemed for who you were, then you might want to impress people. If you weren't made to feel important for just who you were, then you go to medical school like I did, and you want to make yourself important. If you weren't liked for who you were, you're going to be very nice, so that people will like you, so that you can have the simulacrum of love. If you weren't loved, you'll be very charming. And people say, what a charming guy, what a charming woman this person is. But all of this demands that you actually suppress your own feelings. Now, how does that lead to illness? It leads to illness because it's very stressful always to be playing a role. It's actually stressful. And there's always the fear behind it. It's fear-driven. And fear is a state of being in stress. Now, the stress hormones, if I were to scream at you right now and frighten you, you would have a stress response. By the way, just to indicate how inseparable the mind is from the body, that's how simple it is. I could change your physiology in this room. I could change the physiology of 1,500 people in this room without touching them, simply by generating a credible threat. If I had a weapon, for example, and screamed at you, your physiology would change in a split second. That doesn't just happen in extreme circumstances. It happens every moment of our lives, that our physiology responds to our emotions. Now, if I were to stress you right now, to induce fear in you like that, your adrenaline levels will go up and your cortisol levels will go up. Because what happened is that the fear center in the brain would communicate with the hypothalamus in the brain, which is the apex of the autonomic nervous system and also of our hormonal apparatus, and the messages through your autonomic nervous system would go through to the entire body, and then hormones would be released, and then your adrenal gland would respond by secreting adrenaline, which gives you more energy, more strength, more speed for the flight or fight response that you have to generate. And you'd have cortisol released as well, which gives you more sugar so that you can be more energetic again in the escape or struggle response to stress. So in the short term, these hormones save your life. In the long term, they kill you. Adrenaline secreted over a long period of time elevates your blood pressure, narrows your blood vessels, makes you more prone for heart disease or strokes. We know this. Cortisol in the long term depresses, makes you depressed actually. It thins your bones, so you're going to get osteoporosis. It can ulcerate your intestines. You can put fat on your belly in a way that promotes heart disease, and also it suppresses your immune system. So people chronically stressed, we know, have diminished activity of their immune system. So for example, people who are bereaved, and then after a strong, close relationship, of course, depending on the level of social support they have, but the more alone they are, the more likely they're going to be have a high level of a stress response, and you can measure the activity of the immune system as being diminished. Or Britain, I understand, a couple of years ago, actually appointed a minister of loneliness. That's how endemic loneliness has become in our society. And people are lonely, get sick faster, and they die quicker of their diseases. After a bad divorce, it's even worse. The suppression and disturbance of the immune system, according to studies. And there's diminished activity of a group of cells called natural killer cells. Natural killer cells attack malignant cells and attack foreign invaders. George Bush, I'm talking about George Bush Sr., was now deceased, but he survived his wife Barbara by, I think, 1 or 2 years. The day after her funeral, he was hospitalized with a blood infection. I think that was an accident. Bereavement depresses the immune system. In Australia, there was a study. They looked at 500 women with breast lumps that needed to be biopsied to make sure that it wasn't malignant. And before the results were in, the woman underwent a psychological questionnaire. And what they found was that if a woman was emotionally isolated, that by itself didn't increase the chance of developing cancers. If a woman was highly stressed around the onset of that lump, that by itself also didn't increase the chance of developing cancers. But if a woman was emotionally isolated and stressed, the chance of developing cancers was 9 times as great as the average. And the researchers, being medical scientists who think from up here, they couldn't figure this one out, because they said, how does 0 plus 0 add up to 9? If there's 0 effect here, 0 effect there, what's happening? Well, of course it's obvious. What's happening is, for example, in the front row, person at the very aisle seat here, if you're very stressed and you have these high levels of stress hormones, which are affecting your immune system, and if you're all alone with it for months, you might be in trouble. But if there's a friend of yours sitting next to you and says, hey, friend, hey, sweetheart, hey, buddy, you seem upset, do you want to talk about it? What happens to your stress hormones? Your nervous system relaxes, your heart rate decreases, your intestinal muscles in the gut relax, and your stress hormone levels go way down. We're biopsychosocial creatures. And so these patterns of emotional self-suppression, they promote illness in part because they leave us completely alone. Because whether we're alone or not does not depend on how many friends we have. And again, I'm quoting Bessel van der Kolk. He says, social support is not the same as being merely in the presence of others. The critical issue is reciprocity, being truly heard and seen by the people around us, feeling that we're held in someone else's heart and mind. But if I'm suppressing who I am, nobody's ever going to see me. And I might be very nice, and there might be 1,000 people who love me, but none of them know me. And I'm totally isolated, really at heart. And that's what's going on. Let me talk to you briefly about stress, and I'll have to bring this to a close fairly soon. There's so much more I would wish to tell you. Stress is, by the way, there's another mechanism by which stress in early childhood negative experiences lead to disease, which is simply through inflammation. So we know, for example, that the more trauma a child experiences, the greater the level of inflammatory particles in their bloodstream as adults. You can measure inflammatory proteins in the bloodstream, and the more stress you had as a kid, the higher they're going to be. And the more stress you have, there's another structure. I mean, the information is coming in all the time. It's hard to even keep up with it. There's a structure called telomeres. Telomeres are structures at the end of your chromosomes, like the shoelace that has a glue at the end to keep the strands together. Telomeres keep the chromosome together. Telomeres shorten with stress. They also shorten with age. So children who are traumatized, for example, have shorter telomeres, which means that they're chronologically older than their peers. And so there's many mechanisms by which stress affects the body that way. But let me talk to you about stress for a moment. So stress has 3 components, and this is maybe the takeaway. There's the external event called the stressor. So depending on where you stand on Brexit, the defeat of the referendum would have stressed you, or perhaps the success of the referendum is what stressed you. So there's no universal stressor. It depends on the individual of how they perceive and experience a particular event. So the first component of the stress reaction is the event. Okay? The third and final component of the stress reaction is the physiological stress response, with the adrenaline, the cortisol, and the nervous system, and the gut, and the heart, and really the whole body. But in between the external event and the physiological reaction is what we can call the processing apparatus. And the processing apparatus is you and I, with our particular interpretations, our beliefs, usually unconscious interpretations, unconscious beliefs, internal emotional dynamics that we have no control over. That's until we become conscious of them. So the whole point of this talk was to become conscious of what's happening inside us. Now, I can give you a personal example. I believe I have my wife's permission to tell this story. I'm going to tell you something incredible. Going back, say, 20 years ago, my wife's name is Ray, and let's say I would ask her to sleep with me one night, and she'd say no. And I know that for many of you this is totally unbelievable, but actually it did happen occasionally. And the question is now, how does a man in his 50s, a successful physician, national columnist for a prestigious newspaper, head of the palliative care unit at the Vancouver Hospital, how does this guy respond when his wife of, at that time, 30 years says, no, not tonight? Well, in my case, I would curl into a fetal ball, wish that I was dead, and next morning I couldn't even look her in the eye. And what's that all about? Well, of course, you'd say it's about abandonment and rejection. But I wasn't being abandoned or rejected. She just said no tonight, for any number of reasons. What it's really about is that when I was 1 year old, and some of you who know my life history may know this, I was given to a total stranger by my mother, and I didn't see her for 5 or 6 weeks. And this was to save my life in wartime Hungary in December of 1944. I was just under a year old. John Bowlby, the great British psychiatrist and researcher of attachment, talked about the infant's or the young child's response when the mother doesn't show up. These studies are done here in Britain. The first response of the infant or the child, actually the young child, is anxiety when the mother doesn't come back. The second response is depression. Kind of gives up. Life is not worth living without the mom. And then the kid starts acting normally. He'll eat again, he'll interact and play again. And when the mother does come back, this happened when kids were hospitalized and the mothers were told not to visit. It's too upsetting for the kid to see their mother come and go, which is wrong, but this is how they did it. The child is physiologically stressed. Her heart rate goes up, but she won't even look at the mother. And Bowlby calls this defensive detachment. It's a self-protection. The message is, I was so hurt when you abandoned me that I will not make myself vulnerable again to that same degree of pain. And these reactions get programmed into our brains, so much so that 5 decades later, my wife, who I know loves me very much, has been through all kinds of stuff with me, says no one night, and I go into the physiological mental response of the infant, and I won't even look at it. Until I become conscious that this is what's happening. When I become conscious, I can say to myself, well, oh, okay. I'm just telling a story to myself. The story of rejection and abandonment is just a story. And even if I was being rejected and abandoned, I'm not a helpless infant anymore. But you see, we all tell ourselves these stories. And these stories often run our lives. And to the extent that they're unconscious, and to the extent that we keep suppressing ourselves for the sake of attachment, for the sake of being accepted and loved and respected and accepted by others, and we're disconnected from our true selves, to that extent we're stressing ourselves, and to that degree we're actually making ourselves sick. And from that point of view, illness comes along to teach you something. Now, I'm not inviting you to get sick to learn this lesson. Nobody wishes that on anybody else whatsoever. What I am saying is that when illness does come along, and then there's many, many people now, and for my next book, I've talked to a lot of these people, who when they did get sick, rather than just simply see it as a calamity to battle against, they also saw it as an opportunity to learn. And what people keep learning over and over again is how they had not been themselves. Illness came along to bring them back to themselves. That's what they keep learning. So again, I'm not suggesting that anybody should reject Western medicine, although sometimes you may want to, depending on the circumstances. But the point is that nobody should be a passive recipient of anybody else's care. You need to regain that sense of agency. Is that sense of agency of actually making the decisions and actually looking at our lives and our patterns and our dynamics and really being courageous about that and being open about it and being supremely curious and not judging ourselves. Oh God, I failed, I was too nice, I pushed myself down. No. But ask yourself, okay, why was I doing that? And do I really need to do that? Am I still really that infant, a young child, who needs to choose attachment over authenticity? And yes, I may lose some friends who are used to me being this particular way, and that's what they signed up for. But my true friends will celebrate me for finally being myself. The Canadian stress researcher Hans Selye, himself from Hungary like myself, and he coined the word stress, the way we use it today. He said that in the modern world, stresses are mostly emotional, he said, and the biggest stress of all is trying to be something other than who you are. So this takeaway lesson here is get to know who you are and be who you are. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
my next book, which will be published in Britain in 2 years, will be called The Myth of Normal, Illness and Health in an Insane
Alright,
Culture.
so that increases the density of the rhythm.
I would say 10 minutes for questions.
Gives it quite a bit more opaque detail, and starts dissolving her a bit more into the rhythm of the overall composition, which I think is a good start for the next step, which will be more translucencies. But I'm liking that the way it is right now, so I'm going to cut it for the moment. It's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Thoughtless. Have a good day, Earth.
hi. Thank you for your talk.